join us. This is MCI's Lemonade Stand series, where we try to bring topics relevant to male contraception to the community and try and build a sense of community awareness around this sort of thing that we're all striving for. And I think that one thing that we found in our work is that there's learnings to be had from other sectors and other areas. And I think that we can also consider ourselves a piece of the reproductive health spectrum as a whole. Reproductive health meaning reproductive early stage research. It can mean clinical care. It can mean a lot of different things. And to that end, one of the things that we wanted to focus on was talk with some of our partners from the Buck Institute. So here with me, I have Jennifer Garrison, assistant professor, and Bevin Lynn, program director at the Buck Institute, which focuses on reproductive aging. And while reproductive aging as a field is largely focused on female reproductive aging, there's still a lot of considerations for how we can take learnings and work together for a larger purpose to improve reproductive health for men and women in toto. And so what I thought we would bring them on for is to talk about one of their latest efforts, which is the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality, and consider how we can build a consortium that incorporates all facets of reproductive health and all facets of this broad field. So with that, I'll kick it over to Jennifer and Bevin and let them start off and tell you a little bit more about themselves and the organization. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Logan and Heather and MCI for hosting us. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, we just wanted to give a few slides just to give you an overview of what it is that we've been doing. And truly, we're here because while what we're doing at the Buck Institute is focused around female reproductive longevity, as Logan mentioned, they're obviously interconnected. And eventually we hope to expand the work that we're doing to include men as well. But for now, we're at the Buck Institute, which is pictured here. We're in Marin County, which is about 20 miles north of San Francisco. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, we would love to give you a tour. It's a really lovely place. But a couple of years ago, with the support of the Sergey Brin Family Foundation and the Bioeco Foundation, we started an initiative to focus on female reproductive longevity. And the Buck Institute is the first and only freestanding research institute that's focused solely around understanding aging, basic mechanisms of aging. And of course, everyone is familiar with this wonderful graph that illustrates what happens to us starting around middle age, that there's this kind of stochastic decline in a lot of different physiologic systems. And aging really is, I think, the #1 risk factor for all of the diseases of the modern world. But female fertility really falls off of this graph in a profound way and in a way that's pretty dramatic. And really, the female reproductive system is the very first tissue to age in the body. So we think about ovaries kind of like the canary in the coal mine. So the ovaries actually reaches its maximum potential before its first use. This is something that, as an institute that's trying to understand fundamental drivers of aging, we really think that if we can figure out why and how ovaries are aging so early, that might give us a clue about what's happening in other tissues, so that it might have a more universal effect on our understanding of aging in all of our tissues. But, I think when I say reproductive aging to people, they always think about fertility and babies. And what we're doing is really, really fundamentally different from that. So, the fact that women go through a reproductive decline in midlife essentially influences every aspect of her life, whether she wants to have children or not, whether she decides to have children or not. The fact is that going through menopause, the changes that occur in a woman's body at that midlife point have profound impacts on every aspect of a woman's health, including things like cognitive decline and insomnia, depression, heart disease. All of these the risk factors go up exponentially after a woman goes through menopause. And so this is something that's going to affect every single female on the planet, right? So half the population at least. And so, let's see, sorry, got a little stuck there. This chart is what every woman is shown and made to believe is an undeniable truth about her body from the time she's very young. And we think about this actually as being a little bit of a fundamentally inaccurate way to look at things, right? So fertility isn't like a bank that only goes in one direction. Actually, fertility is influenced by a lot of different factors, and it's stochastic and it's cyclical. And so young women go through periods of infertility. Older women in their 50s sometimes even can go through periods of spikes of fertility. And you know, it's really one of the most multivariate signatures in the human body. And so we want to treat this like a multivariable issue. And so the state of the art, which is focused around assisted reproductive technologies in research, is what we're trying to change. We want to understand what the fundamental drivers are of ovarian aging, meaning what's the biological cue or the timer or the signal that basically tells the female reproductive system to enter this decline in midlife. And it's very reproducible, right? And until we do that, I think everything that we're trying to come up with to engineer these solutions are only going to be band-aids. So I'm going to stop talking about women now and tell you something that's maybe a little bit more important for this conversation. So there are really a lot of studies now in the literature that have shown that the age at which a woman goes through menopause is correlated really closely with her longevity. So, you know, age at menopause is actually defined as a really large window. You know, early menopause would be before age 40, late menopause would be after age 54. But the age at which a woman enters menopause is correlated with her lifespan. So if a woman enters menopause later, she tends to live longer, and she also has increased capacity for things like repairing her DNA. But I think what's not appreciated is that brothers of women who go through menopause later in life also tend to live longer. So obviously, you know, there are a lot of factors that influence things like egg quality and number that are both environmental and genetic, but the genetic component is pretty strong. And so, you know, the fundamental drivers of ovarian aging are going to have, I think, really important implications for aging in the rest of the body and for aging in men, potentially in the aging in the male reproductive system. So, and underscore that. So the Buck Institute has two initiatives focused around reproductive longevity. So one is the center, which is intramural, like Buck-centric actual physical place where we have researchers who are devoted to trying to develop strategies to prevent or delay ovarian aging through doing basic research. The second is what Bevin and I are here to talk about. So Bevin is the program director and I'm the faculty director for the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality. And the goal of the consortium is truly to build the ecosystem around this field so that we can facilitate and accelerate discovery in this area. And that means both basic science and also translational work and potentially therapeutics. I don't know, Bevin, I feel like I'm talking an awful lot and you haven't said anything. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sure, yeah. I think that was a fantastic scientific background to intro the fundamental concept of what the consortium is looking to accomplish. And I think, Jennifer, what you said about changing the narrative really is key, because what the consortium is trying to answer is why. Why does all of that happen? And it's not about just fertility or just babies. Exactly, Jennifer, what you had said, whether or not a woman or her partner or, you know, men want to have children, this will happen biologically and at some point. So longevity really is just the time that we have. So we really are looking to enable the understanding behind the mechanism of why. If you want to, Jennifer, advance the slide, or
yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, pick up where you had left off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the consortium has several arms. One is funding. So we just gave away $7.4 million in grants, 2-year grants, to scientists, 22 scientists, to try to tackle this this area of biology. And I would say that up until now, I think there have been very few scientists focused around this issue, and that's truly because there hasn't been funding in this area. So, this is probably a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to focus in this area, but it's a great start. And we've started just, the discourse with governmental funding bodies and private funding bodies to try to shine a spotlight on the need for research in this area that's outside of assisted reproductive technology, and focused more on answering these basic questions. So we're really excited about these grants and the grantees, and we hope to continue doing this and to change the focus of what the grants are for every few years to try to help guide where the field is going. But separately from that, money is wonderful, but if there's no ecosystem to support it, then that's a problem. So really a big part of our mandate is to build a network of support. And that means not just scientists, but clinicians, people like you at MCI and your supporters who are interested in this area of science. And so we put in place a couple of support systems to accelerate the research. So one is the first ever reproductive biology core facility. So kind of like a genomics or a sequencing facility. It's a place that can help people get experiments established in this area, particularly to bring researchers in from outside the field, right? To bring in people who work in other areas to focus their attention on this problem. And we've also put together a bioinformatics core facility that is helping our grantees and anyone with an interest in this area to analyze large-scale data sets. And when COVID is over, we will have an annual scholar symposium, which we hope will be a landmark meeting in the field. We've also, I'll touch on this in a minute, but we've put together a communications platform and a data sharing platform for people to talk to each other. Because if the goal is to, build the ecosystem, then we really need to give people a place to communicate. And, you can actually read about our mission on our website, so I won't spend too much time on this. And for our scholars, the 22 people that we gave grants to are all over the world. We wanted this to be global, and they represent every aspect of training. So we've got postdoctoral fellows, we've got junior faculty awards, and senior scholar awards, so people who've got established labs. And the goal there was to try to both build the field, but also to draw in people from outside. And this is not even a comprehensive list, but a list of some of the areas that the different grantees are working on. And many of these grants, which are focused in the female system, would be just as applicable in the male system. So we're really excited about this and looking for ways to try to build some common ground here. So I'm going to stop sharing slides in a minute, and so that we can have a discussion. But I wanted to point out that we do have this network. We set it up so that it can be a discussion platform where we're sharing both news, information about the science that's going on, really lots of different things. And so we would love it if you wanted to join the network. It's at gcrle.org. And if you see something that you think should be there that isn't there, we're happy to add to it. Right now, it's, I would say, a work in progress, a beta system. And until, we're trying to draw in as many people as we can to participate in this ecosystem. So please sign up. Did you want to talk about this, Bevin, or?
We are global by nature. We have initiated a collaborative webinar series with the National University of Singapore School of Medicine, which is fantastic because it bridges so many of our joint initiatives geographically, and then also based on our joint missions. And this is still up and coming. We will be hosting along with NUS starting late February. It'll run for 10 webinar series, and there's definitely more information to follow, and we'd be very happy to share that with this audience for wide distribution and attendance. So more on that, please stay tuned. Actually, what gives a really wonderful synopsis of what Jennifer has just provided the overview of is this white paper, which is available for download and gives a synopsis of not just what we're looking to do in the field of female reproductive longevity, but also with what the mention that Jennifer had pointed out about brothers. So it impacts men as well. Women's health is certainly a men's issue, and we really want to draw a spotlight to that. I think we want to open it up for discussion. It doesn't have to be a question. We might not have the answers, the field being so new, but we would love for Logan, if you'll help facilitate some dialogue, would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'd love to. And in fact, I have a question that I want to start off with selfishly, and that's thinking about the ecosystem, right? So you'll probably need people outside of science too that can help build a consortium, build this sort of ecosystem that you want to see. So who are the people that you're interested in targeting, maybe the ones that are outside of science?
Yeah, I think that is a great place to kick off, because the short answer is everyone. We are all each other's ambassadors. And I think one of the most powerful ways to learn and educate is to do what we're doing, to talk to each other. For example, I have a friend that I met in travels. She actually lives in Poland. She's 25 and never needed to think about menopause. It hadn't even crossed her mind yet, because why should it? It's sort of like when you go to the doctor when you're feeling ill, but you wouldn't think about going to the doctor when you're healthy. So to answer your question, we all need to start talking about this. It is something that is generally confined to a very small audience, usually just women who are going to or about to or have gone through menopause already. And by then, we don't have the runway to address things that maybe we could have early on. Jennifer, please chime in.
Yeah, I agree. I think for the ecosystem building, I really think that getting people who don't normally talk to each other to communicate is kind of a key focal point for us. So at one level, that means getting scientists and clinicians to speak to each other. And that's part of what the webinar series with NUS is about. We're going to talk to, my co-host is a physician scientist who sees patients. And so he's going to, we're going to focus each episode around something he's seen clinically, and then have presentations by scientists talking about how they might attack that particular issue that this clinician saw. But also to bring in, ambassadors, so people who can spread the word about what we're doing, potential funders, right? We don't actually, we've talked a lot to the NIH, and I think that they're waking up to the idea that this is a really fundamentally important thing to study. But historically, it's been reproductive biologists who are working on, germ cell development and infertility, and aging researchers. And so the idea that we're trying to blend these two fields into something new, there really aren't that many people working at the interface. And I think trying to reframe the problem as, it's really not about having babies. It's about, women's health. Really, truly, fundamentally, it's about changing the narrative around women's health. That's something that, requires us to talk to, policymakers and, and then from the science perspective, we're trying very hard to get our basic scientists to talk to the people who can help them, accelerate things into the clinic, because the amount of time right now that it takes to get from a discovery at the bench to something in a person is, huge. So we put together a translational advisory board of, people in industry who can help us both identify things that should be accelerated, and then also to help us, get those grantees in front of the right people, so that it's not 10 years between discovery and some kind of product.
That's really important. And I agree that it takes all pieces of this, both people in the science realm, people in the translational realm, and people completely outside of science to make it a community conversation. So with that, I'd love to open it up. If anybody in the audience has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and jump in. While you're thinking about things, I have one more follow-up that I want to ask, and that's really what excites you the most about that interface between reproductive biology and aging. That's you mentioned it's kind of a new field where not a lot of people live right now. What's really exciting about that to you?
Well, for me, and I'll just answer in brief personally. So I'm an engineer by training, and it was my background in medical device diagnostics was for disease like cancer, and being new to the field of aging and reproductive studies, it turns out that that is the number one and only thing that everyone will experience eventually someday. We won't all come down with any specific disease like cancer or diabetes, but we will all age. So for me, that was really, really exciting, because this interface doesn't exist yet. The two ends of the spectrum do, in regards to being a well-established field of study in reproductive biology, and then in aging, like what the Buck has expertise in. But the interface is completely new. And that for me is really exciting. And it's also really exciting to share that epiphany with others who also, like myself, had never thought of it before.
Yeah, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so I think that the brain is the most important organ, no matter what. And for me, I think, reproductive biology has really been developmental focused, for the most part. That area of science has really been focused on understanding the gametes and how they come into being, and then, how many there are and how quickly they disappear. And aging research has really been at the systemic level, at the organismal level, right? Aging is a multivariable process. And so I think taking some of the perspective that we have in the aging field, looking at the body as a whole and thinking about intertissue signaling and how that's important for, for aging in every tissue, and applying that to things like the ovary, right? And the ovary itself is so complex, right? It's a really complicated machine with a lot of different compartments. And this is true in the male system as well, that there are a lot of different tissues that talk to each other. And I think, stepping back and thinking about, for example, how the brain talks to the reproductive system, not necessarily with respect to like cycling, but with respect to aging, I think that there's really a lot of fertile ground there in terms of open research questions.
Mm-hmm. So I just got a question sent to me in the chat. Feel free to, you can either send your questions directly to me, or you can post them in the public chat, as well as unmute yourself. This question is from Carmen. It says, the focus is on female and women's healthy aging. Do you think that studies should then only include women, or should most intervention studies include a comparison with the impact of males as well? I'm assuming that can mean really all sorts of different studies. We'd be thinking about environmental factors, we'd be thinking about other sort of variables. But do you think that comparison with men is important in this sort of aspect?
I do. Yeah, I do. It depends. If you're asking a question about ovaries, you probably need to work in a system where there are ovaries present. But this is almost the opposite of what's happened historically in biomedical research, right? Until very recently, only very recently, the NIH made a requirement that females had to be included in in all of the NIH funded research when it made sense. And so this is the opposite question, but in terms of including males, yeah, I think it's really important. And one of the pilot studies actually that we have going on right now is it's a really important study, and it's one that's never been done because it takes a long time. But we're actually doing it in humans in the world, like out in the world. And so we're finally catching up in the lab. And that is to look at what is the consequence of having one or two older parents on the reproductive capacity of the offspring. So meaning if you have an old mother or an old father or both, what happens to the reproductive longevity of the offspring? And of course, yeah, we really are doing that experiment already in people, but it takes, for mice to get old, it takes a year or two, and and then if you want to look at the reproductive longevity of their children, then that's that essentially is a many-year experiment. But we're doing that right now, and it looks like there are differences. You get different effects of having an older father versus having an older mother. So yeah, I think looking at, and honestly, I think a lot of what we're going to discover in the female system will translate into the male system, right? Andropause is something that, again, is not very well studied, and certainly an area of research that's been underfunded for a long time.
Yeah, I'm a biologist and do research in reproduction, and I'm focusing on natural male birth control, so dry orgasm. So yeah, I wanted to just expand on what you were saying, that yeah, they're really, like, in the general public, male aging and reproduction is really not understood, and the whole concept of andropause, unfortunately, and I mean, I've been reading about this for well over a decade, if not longer than that. But unfortunately, I think there needs to be more information given out there to the general public regarding that, so that men know of the risk factors of reproducing at later ages, which is unfortunately still not, it's not known.
It's not known. It's crazy, actually. Yeah. We got delayed by COVID, but we did organize the very first ever reproductive aging conference. So a conference whose main focus is reproductive aging, male and female, not just female. A FASED meeting, which was supposed to take place in May 2021. Now it will take place in May 2022. And obviously we'll share all of that information with you guys when we have it, but we would love it would be great to have, we're going to have, equal number of talks around male and female reproductive aging. But yeah, it's really an understudied and underfunded area. There's no question.
So I just had another question from the audience sent to me that says, where do you think that men fit into the greater conversation around women's health, especially thinking about reproductive aging and how we can, scientifically, we can learn things about male aging and how it affects offspring, et cetera. But in terms of the conversation and participation now in terms of male reproductive health, how do you think that men fit into that?
Oh, I wasn't sure if you were going to, so with, in regards to, so programmatically, and I'll speak from the consortium aspect, and then Jennifer, if you follow up with the scientific aspect, I think once the narrative shifts, which it starts with exactly what we're doing right now, having conversation and giving rise to some of these new thoughts around existing ideas, perhaps, I think men are going to be the pivotal point around everything in regards to not just women's health, but exactly as the last speaker who had the question, who had pointed out, a lot is also unknown about men's health. as well. So it becomes more of a holistic conversation around reproductive longevity for people. And I think that ultimately is where the consortium will be able to address some of the fragmented issues in this discussion. So for example, we're global by nature, and it becomes geographic, it becomes it becomes gender agnostic, because it becomes one topic where we can all fill in the pieces. So then scientifically, Jennifer, what are those pieces?
Oh, well, I mean, honestly, I think what can men do right now? Is that what that's what you were asking, right? I don't see the chat. Can you repeat?
Sorry, it's a direct message to me. Yeah,
That's
just
okay.
where men fit into that broader question of women's reproductive health today.
Yeah, I think today it's really, I would say that today it's really a question of acknowledging that there's an equality issue here, right? If we could delay the age at which a woman goes through menopause by 5 or 10 years, that would have a profound impact on her overall health, and probably on her longevity as well. So there's, acknowledging that there's this inequality that's, biologically programmed, unfortunately, is one way. And then in terms of, from a more selfish angle, men should care about this because because there are genetic factors that influence lifespan, which are important for women's reproductive longevity. So, if they're not swayed by the idea that there's a sort of a basic equality issue, then from a more self-centric point of view, understanding what those genetic factors are will be important for men's longevity as well.
And it's actually, just to add to that, it's not just the biological equality, but the time frame in a woman's life at which this happens is also profoundly impactful. So professionally, and then it has economic impact as well. And so across every slice of not just a woman's life, but men also, this is important. And I think, to what Jennifer had said, like, men should care because it does impact them. Maybe it doesn't seem quite so directly because he is not the one going through menopause, but across every angle of life, this is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions from the audience? Anybody want to jump in with something?
This is Heather. I have a question. I don't mean to be MCI centric, so if somebody else does, for sure, I've been trying to give other people a chance. But I'll just jump in with, and I know Bevin and Jennifer know this is something I find super interesting, is thinking about how this new concept of and not new, but this concept of really bringing reproductive aging to the forefront, and as part of a treatment regimen, and part of your engagement time span with physicians, I think is interesting in the context of contraception, because we've talked about this too. So many women are taking contraception into their later years and then having their children at an older age, myself included. I always love to see the geriatric ovary at 30 or whatever. But it's interesting to think about in the context of becoming sort of a lockstep component of counseling for women who are contracepting, and that for lack of a better word, tricky window when you're transitioning off especially a long-acting method, where some people might have some concerns, founded or not, around any sort of delay in return to fertility, things like that. So I think having the kind of work that you guys are doing, like puzzle pieced in with this larger continuum of reproductive healthcare, is super exciting. So I'm just curious what you guys think about that. I know it's more of a random statement than a question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I actually think this is maybe one of the major bridges where the work that you are doing at MCI and what we're trying to build with the consortium, I think this is one of the major synergies, right? Because, birth control, whether on the male side or the female side, is sort of a big part of what we're talking about. And in a way, you know, we kind of want to redefine what birth control is, at least for the woman. You know, calling it control is actually, we want to find a better way to call it. Like it's a superpower, right? It's, in a way, it's like a woman's superpower. But yeah, it's very political, obviously. But I do think that that you know we've spent a generation now. We have a generation of women who've been on birth control mostly continuously for their adult lives, and again, we're doing the experiment in the population rather than in the lab. We don't really know what the long-term effects are of being on birth control for so long, and I think a lot of women are surprised when they stop taking birth control and they can't get pregnant, and that may be part of where all of this interest now in reproductive longevity is coming from. But Bevin, did you want to jump in? Sorry, I feel like I'm just gonna continue rambling if you don't interrupt me.
No, I agree with what you're saying. Oftentimes contraception is purely the responsibility of the woman. And in part, I think men kind of have one option, I guess, is the condom, sort of one traditional option, perhaps. And it's interesting to me that women's health and reproductive systems are so complex that not much is known, and yet the birth quote unquote control, as Jennifer mentioned, is all on the responsibility of the women. But I do think that jointly and starting with these types of conversations, it will become more of the equality part. I feel like contraception in some ways, it's reversed equality for men because it's the conversation about women. So this is fantastic. It's really interesting. It's these types of questions that generate more questions that ultimately, one day maybe we'll have answers for.
I have a question for you all. Since you're here to support MCI and you know all about what MCI is doing. How do you see any synergies now that you've listened to what we were doing? Do you all see any synergies, or do you have any ideas for how we might work together and move this forward?
I'll jump in and say absolutely. From the first time we spoke to you guys, that's what got us excited, because much as what you both were just saying, it's about sort of changing the conversation around reproductive health. It's been so focused on women bearing the brunt of contraception and family planning. So we've viewed increasing male options as sort of building into the spectrum. So the first time we spoke to you guys, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a third puzzle piece. So there's this, I immediately had this idea, because one of the things that we're constantly thinking about is what is going to be the point of care or point of access for contraception for men, because we talk about women going to the OBGYN at a relatively young age, and that's where you go to contraception, or a family practitioner or whatever. But the first thing you think of for contraception for men beyond a condom is a urologist and vasectomy, and young men aren't going to immediately go to that. So I feel like this is the first spark in something that could be really exciting and transformative in sort of reproductive health science and reproductive health care as a much larger continuum. Female contraception, we've talked about tons as being step one, allowing women to have the autonomy to control pregnancy outcomes so that they could, as the person who bears the brunt of the pregnancy, they can manage their ability to complete educations, go for careers, whatever they want to do. But now that has, I think most people would agree, kind of lasted a little bit longer than it needed to with only their control. So let's get men to have the ability to contribute to that as part of a couple's relationship or not, and men also to be able to feel like they have control of their reproductive autonomy, because we were really surprised to hear really young men. We interviewed some high school students, well, our colleagues at YTH did, and some of these young men were saying, I want to feel like I can take something that protects me from an unintended pregnancy. And, you know, I think we kind of dismiss that there's that scare for young men too. So I think as we're building that and sort of increasing this wave, hopefully, of contraception for both men and women, then the longevity will come into play. And as you guys described, sort of this intermingling of women coming off contraception so that their partners can go on while they're trying, you know, maybe while they're trying to, you know, deal with the backing off of the hormones or whatever they might be dealing with. I think it's really exciting. So I see we're kind of coming at it at the same speed and from the same space of trying to expand more broadly this concept of what is reproductive health care. So now I'm talking too much. I'm going to shut up. Logan, do you have anything?
No, I agree. Does anybody in the audience want to chime in on you know, ways that we could work together in ways that kind of the male space can find mutual benefit with reproductive longevity in that field as a whole?
Well, I wanted to jump in real quick, just to kind of talk about a little bit what you were talking about before there with males taking part in birth control. In my research, I've looked into 19th century birth control, and apparently men took a very active role in birth control back then, and there was a lot of writing about that. There was a lot of amazingly condom use and things like that. And it was only through the Anthony Comstock anti-obscenity laws of 1873 that stopped the discussion of male birth control. So it's really fascinating. But as far as birth control is concerned, also in my research, what I've discovered is that even when women do take birth control, of course, it's not 100% effective. And so women do still get pregnant on other forms of birth control. And so I think the discussion should really be that both partners would be taking some form of birth control instead of like one person and then the other person. And so another interesting thing I discovered was in Germany, pull-out technique is very commonly used. And that seems, of course, a lot of places discourage that, but if that's the only form of birth control that a man uses, and if he's good at that, and I've interviewed men who have used that for decades and not had an unplanned pregnancy. So it's better than nothing until something comes out, but they are working on pills and all sorts of other things. And there's like a switch that they're working on in Germany as well. So there are various things that hopefully will come out on the market soon.
Yeah, so I did have one follow-up question from Carmen. She mentioned that she's noticed that the Buck Institute is tackling mitochondria and bioenergetics. I'm just curious about how much collaboration there is between this program, how much multidisciplinary approaches you have between that and other projects and programs.
Oh yeah, the model at the Buck Institute is actually interdisciplinary and collaborative. So they opened their doors in 1999. So this was long before collaboration was really what it is today. And if you look at the publications that come out of the Institute, there are almost always multiple PIs, multiple labs on every paper. And that's because, you know, in truth, we are kind of like a medium-sized department. We're 24 investigators, and we work in really disparate areas. So I'm a neuroscientist. There are evolutionary geneticists who work in yeast. We have gerontologists who see patients. You know, we really span the gamut in terms of areas of biology. And the umbrella that holds us together is this interest in understanding fundamental drivers of aging. And so, yes, when I have a question about mitochondria, I go down and I talk to Martin Brand, who is an expert in mitochondrial bioenergetics. And if I have a question, you know, about something that happens in older patients, I go and talk to John Newman, who is a gerontologist who sees patients at the VA. And so actually, you know, the reason that we were approached with this idea is because the goal was to, you know, to take reproductive biologists, bring them into the Institute, and then let the Buck model take over. So this kind of cross-pollination of ideas and this collaboration mentality. And that actually has happened. So the center's been open for just over about a year and a half. And there are already multiple collaborative grants and multiple collaborative projects that are going on. And part of, the impetus for including the Reproductive Biology Hub as part of the consortium was so that, researchers who are at the Buck who might have an interest in looking at aging in reproductive tissues can do that easily, right? Because there is an activation energy to trying to move into a new system or a new area as a scientist, and having experts who can both do experiments for you, but also who can train, people in your labs to actually, carry out the experiments themselves, and then you can bring the techniques back into your lab. It's really powerful. So yeah, there's a ton of collaboration. Yeah.
Logan, if there's not a question from an audience member waiting, I have one I could ask.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, I kind of see you in the presentation, the way that you're framing the impact that the reproductive aging and different reproductive experiences can have. And I was kind of relating to that as we talk about male contraception, even like the name, right? Male contraception. And I guess my question is, could you talk a little bit about how you frame and how you convince people when the intervention and the experience is on an individual level and is kind of gender siloed, but the impact is not within those gender silos? And I saw you kind of doing that, talking about women and brothers and women and children and partners, but I was wondering, I think that's something we kind of try and navigate a lot, and I just wanted to kind of hear about your experience with that.
Are you asking, how do we make people or men, in regards to gender silo, how do we make them care?
How do we make them care? And how do we talk about the impact when we're talking about a gender siloed biological experience that has greater implications?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And your question is exactly, I think, what everyone on this in this discussion are trying to accomplish. It's hard, and change is very hard. And what the previous comment about, dating all the way back to the 1900s, and then something political happened, and then they didn't talk about it anymore. And so it will ebb and flow. And what we can do right now is really the essence of what the consortium is looking to do. So Jennifer had mentioned there's sort of an intramural initiative, the center at the Buck, and the consortium, which is what Jennifer and I are representing here, is extramural, looking to reach beyond the Buck and connect. I know everyone sounds a little bit broad and general, but to your point about gender silos, everyone does need to care. And it starts with the first step. So the ecosystem that Jennifer mentioned is what we are looking to build in the consortium. I hate to say membership. Membership is open to everyone, but it's people right now who at least know about it and who share a common vision and mission. And everyone on this call is also welcome to join our network and our ecosystem. I think everyone has immense impact and something to add. To try to address your question directly, how do we make people care? It has to be personal, right? It has to mean something to each individual, regardless of gender or identification, sexual identification, anything of that sort. That's what Jennifer is saying. This is not about babies. It's not about fertility. It's really understanding, why does this happen, so that we can have more option and choice. So I think with what MCI is looking to do from the male perspective, what the consortium is looking to do currently from the female perspective, and we will all meet somewhere in the middle, it's going to take a lot of time, because right now, you're right, some people don't have to care. And we want to get them to, by starting with these types of discussions and making it personal. Why should they care? Letting them know how it impacts not just him or herself or themselves, but people they care about. The consortium was actually initiated, actually our funder has a very personal story that she's gone public with. She herself cares a lot, and that's how we came to be. So Jennifer, please add to that.
Oh, I would just say, yeah, I think I agree with everything that you just said. When I'm talking to people, I think you have to decide how to connect with them specifically. But I think, and you can do that at a biological level. You can talk to them about what's important to them, either for their own bodies or for someone they care about. But at a societal level, there's a lot of arguments that you can make that are really that should resonate with everyone, right? I think so we end up having to try to reach the men in the audience, right? But we also struggle with talking to women who've already gone through menopause, because their attitude is, what do I care? Like, I'm past that landmark, and you can't help me. And so talking to them about sort of actually if we could figure out what are the drivers that cause menopause and what are the things that lead to these adverse health outcomes, if we could figure them out, I think we actually could make a difference in the lives of women who've gone through menopause. But figuring out where someone is and then talking to them about how what we're doing relates to where they are, I think is the most important thing.
Just as a quick example for the women who have already gone through menopause, one angle that I found really resonated with them were with their granddaughters or with their daughters or with their sons, or their people maybe who have not gone through it, that they now are in a position to be able to do something so that the people they care and love about can have a better experience. So that is one way to make someone care.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things about this, is ensuring that people have buy-in. It's either personal buy-in or buy-in because they're people that they know and love are affected by these sort of issues. And I think that's men, women across the spectrum. Do we have any other questions? We have time for one more question if anybody has anything to like chime in with.
I've got one question which kind of bridges this, which is, you're studying clinically and scientifically kind of the process of aging reproductively. How are you bridging that to the experience that is lived or felt, and connecting the two? Are you looking at that, or how are you looking at that?
When you ask about the experience, do you mean like individually, when people may or may not be as connected to either the research or the clinical side?
So actually the experience of going through the process, right? So there's the actual aging process that happens inside us, and then there's the experience that we feel symptomatically, asymptomatically, et cetera. So that kind of bridging between here's what a woman goes through in her experience of it, connected to here's what's going on in her body.
That's an excellent question. So we've been talking a lot about the science, and you're saying, well, okay, but it would be great if you could also explore, talking to people about what's happening to them. And yes, we're trying to do that. So one of the members of the center, her name is Dina Amira. She's a PhD scientist. She's an evolutionary biologist. She studied the female body for her whole career. So she did her PhD on the evolution of menstruation, and her postdoc on the evolution of pregnancy. And now she's interested in the evolution of menopause, and she's writing a book about it. So it's called The Story of Her, and it's written not for scientists, it's actually written for the lay public. And the goal is really to draw people into thinking about and also understanding what are kind of complicated scientific concepts, but through the lens of their own experience or the experience of their partners. Yeah, so that's one way we're doing that. But we're also, once we're out of COVID, we're really hoping to hold, salon type events where we can talk to people and get their experiences. Bevin and I have been doing an informal sort of listening tour, talking to people about their experiences, both professional and personal, to try to frame this as a as a whole, as a holistic whole. Yeah.
And I think actually the question, I think your question is actually the answer to the previous question. How do we make people care? It's through the experience.
Yeah, exactly. Are you connected at all to BioInc or Clue? Are you familiar with Clue, the app?
No.
So it's a period tracking app.
Oh yes, yes. Sorry.
Yes.
Actually,
Clue. So,
I think, is Camilla here? Camilla Starica is on the call. She's from Flow, the period tracker app.
okay, perfect. Yeah, I just got off a call with Amanda there, and but if you're not already collaborating with them, they have a huge network and a whole platform of users who are tracking their experiences.
Yes.
And they do quite a lot of collaboration on analysis of those data. So
right. Yes. That's one of the reasons that we talked to Camilla as well. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody coming today. We've run out of time today, but I want to thank our speakers, Jennifer and Bevin, for going over a topic that I think is really important for the male space, and especially to encourage collaboration, encouraging learnings, and then also to think about what Steve brought up there, our experience, our shared experience, and how that can encourage empathy and understanding across the gender divide. So thank you very much for coming and speaking with us today. Audience members, if you have any questions for anybody, feel free to reach out to us via email, and we're more than happy to follow up. I want to thank everybody for coming, and have a wonderful day.